That area is restricted. This is my plane. That cabinet holds my documents. I'm going to need you to return to your seat. I'm not moving. The sound of a hand. Across a face. On her own jet, silence. 35,000 feet. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't demand an apology. She sat back down, opened her briefcase, and kept reading. What that flight attendant didn't know. The woman she just slapped owned the plane, owned the company that employed her, had the power to end her career with one phone call. Anne chose to wait. Why? Because what came next wasn't about anger. It was about something the flight attendant never saw coming. Something quiet. Something airtight. Something that couldn't be unfiled. Stay with us. This is the story of Vivienne Caldwell, and it starts at 35,000 feet. There's a kind of tired that money can't fix. Not the tired that comes from working late. Not the tired that a good night's sleep can cure. I'm talking about something deeper. Something that lives in your bones. It's the tired that comes from spending your whole life proving you belong somewhere you already built. My name is Vivienne Caldwell. I'm 58 years old. I grew up in Selma, Alabama. My mother was a school teacher. My father was a welder. We didn't have much, but we had something that a lot of people spend their whole lives searching for and never find. We had dignity. My mother used to get up every morning and press her best dress. Every single morning. Even when the washing machine broke and she had to iron by hand. Even when the school board cut her budget again. Even when parents complained about things that had nothing to do with her teaching. She got up. She pressed that dress. And she walked into that classroom like she owned the whole world. I asked her once. I said, "Mama, why do you get dressed up every day?" "They don't pay you enough for that." She looked at me, real slow, the way she looked at students who said something foolish. She said, "Baby, they can underpay me, but they cannot tell me I'm not worth showing up for." I never forgot that. I've thought about those words on the hardest days of my life. The days when a bank wouldn't look at my loan application. The days when a room full of men in expensive suits talked around me like I wasn't there. The days when I had to be twice as prepared, twice as patient, twice as everything, just to get half the respect. I thought about those words this morning too. It was just past 6:30 when I pulled into Hartsfield-Jackson Private Terminal. Atlanta was still quiet. That soft, gray quiet before the city remembers what it's supposed to be. I parked, sat in the car for a moment. Gus was already there, my brother, 64 years old, and he still moves like a man who has somewhere important to be. He was standing near the entrance with 2 cups of coffee, squinting at his phone. He looked up when he saw my car. Raised 1 cup, I smiled. Got out. That man has been beside me for 32 years of building this company. He was there when we had 1 truck and a dream that most people thought was a joke. He was there when we signed our first real contract. He was there when we almost lost everything in 2008. He'll probably be there when they put me in the ground. I've made my peace with that. "You're 2 minutes late," he said, handing me the coffee. "I'm the boss," I said. "I'm exactly on time," he laughed. That big, easy laugh that sounds exactly like our father. We walked inside together. Nadine was already at the gate, going over documents on her iPad. She looked up once, nodded at me, and went back to reading. That's Nadine. No wasted motion. No small talk before the coffee kicks in. She's been my attorney for 11 years. In that time, she has never once told me what I wanted to hear when the truth was something different. That is rarer than people think. And Reverend Cornelius Bates was seated near the window. 71 years old. Suit jacket neatly buttoned, hands folded in his lap. He was looking out at the tarmac. Peaceful, like a man who had made his accounting with the world a long time ago. Reverend Bates wasn't traveling for business. He was coming along to Washington because he was an old family friend. And because Gus had told him about this trip, and the Reverend had said, "I haven't been to D.C. in 6 years. I'd like to see those cherry blossoms before I die." Gus had said, "You're not dying, Cornelius." The Reverend had said, "Gus, I'm 71. Every trip could be my last." That's not pessimism. That's arithmetic, so here he was. On my plane, going to see cherry blossoms. I walked up to him and touched his shoulder gently. He looked up. His face opened into a smile. "Vivienne," his voice was warm. "Like a room with a fireplace in it. You look like your mother. You say that every time you see me, I said. Because it's true every time, he said. I sat beside him for a moment. Just a moment. Outside on the tarmac, I could see her, my plane, N771VC, a Gulfstream G550. She was sitting there in the early morning light, crew already moving around her. People ask me sometimes what it felt like. The first time I saw her after the purchase was finalized. I tell them the truth. It didn't feel like what I expected. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I thought I'd feel like I'd arrived somewhere. I thought I'd want to take a picture or call someone. Instead, I just stood there, very still. And I thought about all the times in my life someone had made me feel like I didn't belong in a room. Every bank that looked at me sideways. Every boardroom where I was the only black woman. Every conference where someone assumed I was the assistant. Every moment where I had to decide, is it worth correcting them, or do I just keep moving? And I thought, not here. Not on this one. Here, nobody can make me feel like I don't belong. I believed that. I really believed that. The private terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson has a different energy than the main airport. It's quieter, slower. The lighting is softer. People speak in lower voices. There's a particular kind of calm that comes from knowing you don't have to fight for overhead bin space. But make no mistake, just because the setting is calmer doesn't mean the dynamics are different. Money changes the location of the room, doesn't always change what happens inside it. Troy Wimberton arrived at 6:50, right on schedule. Troy is 57 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who looks like he was born in a good suit. He and I have been doing business together for 17 years. He was one of the first people who looked at Caldwell Aviation Group and said, "This is going to be something." He said that when we had 6 employees and a shared office space in a building that smelled like old carpet. I've never forgotten that either. Troy walked in, spotted me across the lounge, pointed at me like I was the person he'd been looking for all day. "Vivienne," he said, "ready to make history?" "I'm always ready," I said. He grinned, shook hands with, nodded at Nadine, patted Reverend Bates on the shoulder and said, "Cornelius, good to see you, old man." Reverend Bates said, "You're older than me by 3 years, Troy." Troy laughed. "I age better. That's the thing about Troy. He could walk into a funeral and make 3 friends before the service started. It's a gift, honestly. Some people are just built for rooms." We did a final check with the ground crew. Everything was in order. I reviewed the basic pre-departure notes with my pilot, Captain Harriet Cole. No relation to me. We've had to clarify that more than once. And then we were ready to board 6 people plus crew. 1 flight. Washington, D.C. sensible. I want to be clear about something because it matters to the story. I was not dressed the way people expect a CEO to dress when they board a private jet. I had on dark slacks, a lightweight navy jacket, comfortable shoes. Not sneakers, but not dress shoes either. The kind of shoes a woman wears when she knows she's going to be on her feet all day. No jewelry except my mother's watch. Small face, gold band a little worn around the edge. No company badge. No title lanyard. No sign on my forehead. I've thought about this a lot since. Whether I should have worn something different. Whether I should have made it more obvious. Whether the version of me that walked onto that plane should have looked more like what people expect a CEO to look like. And every time, I come back to the same answer. No. Because the day I start dressing to manage other people's assumptions is the day I let their assumptions manage me. My mother didn't press that dress every morning to manage anyone's assumptions. She did it because she knew her own worth, and that was for her, not for them. So I walked onto my plane the way I always walk onto my plane. Comfortable, purposeful, ready to work. That was my first time meeting Renata Shaw. She was standing at the top of the air stairs when I boarded. Uniform pressed perfect, hair pulled back, posture exactly right. The picture of professionalism. She had a clipboard in her left hand. She was checking off the passenger manifest as people boarded. Troy went up the stairs ahead of me. She smiled at him. The full smile, the real one. The one that reaches the eyes. "Welcome aboard, sir. Can I get you anything before departure?" Troy said something charming. She laughed. Natural, easy. Then I came up the stairs. Something changed. I don't know how to describe it to someone who's never experienced it. It's not like a door slamming. It's more like a light dimming. Just a fraction. Just enough. Her eyes went to my face. Then, very briefly, down to my shoes. Then, back up. The smile stayed. But it shifted. "Welcome aboard," she said. Her voice was still professional, still perfectly correct. "Your name, please." "Vivienne Caldwell." She looked down at the clipboard. Found the name. Her pen hovered for just a moment. "Miss Caldwell," she made a small mark. "You'll be seated in Section 1. "I know," I said. "Thank you." I moved past her into the cabin. Behind me, I heard her greet Gus, then Nadine, then Reverend Bates. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, but I felt it. The way you feel a draft from a window that looks like it's closed. Gus caught up with me inside the cabin. He said nothing, just gave me a small look, the look that means I saw it too. I sat down, opened my briefcase, started going through the documents for the Washington meeting. The cabin was beautiful. I'd had it redesigned 2 years before. Cream leather, warm lighting, real wood paneling, a small table near the forward section where I usually worked during longer flights. I knew every inch of this plane, and I was sitting in it trying to convince myself that what I'd just felt wasn't what I knew it was. We took off just before 7:15. Atlanta fell away beneath us. The sprawl of the city, then suburbs, then the long green stretch of the Appalachian foothills. The sky was that particular shade of blue you only get in early morning. Clear, enormous. I love this moment, every single time. The moment when the ground releases you and you're just up. Above all of it, Gus always closes his eyes during takeoff. He's been flying with me for 12 years and he still does this. I've never asked him about it. Some things you just let people have. Troy fell asleep almost immediately. He had a gift for that. Could sleep anywhere, anytime, and wake up fully alert. A skill he'd developed in 30 years of travel. He pulled his eye mask down before we'd even leveled off. Reverend Bates was looking out the window. Something about his expression made me think he might be praying, or maybe just thinking. With the Reverend, the two things sometimes looked the same. Nadine was working. She was always working. I had my documents spread across the small table. The Meridian Health contract was substantial, complex. There were several clauses I wanted to go through before we landed. Clean details. Make sure our position was airtight. About 20 minutes into the flight, the flight attendant, the younger one, Lena, I'd learn her name later, came through and offered drinks. Water, coffee, juice. I asked for coffee, black. She brought it quickly and quietly. Professional, I went back to my documents. The cabin settled into that particular rhythm of early morning travel. Quiet. The hum of the engines underneath everything. The soft click of Nadine's typing. The distant sound of the city you'd left behind. This is when I do my best thinking. I was reading through the liability section of the Meridian contract when I realized I needed something. The supplemental attachments. The ones that cross-referenced our logistics data from the past 3 years. I'd put them in the document storage compartment at the back of the forward section. It's a lockable cabinet on the left side of the plane. I've kept documents there on every flight for the past 4 years. It's my system, my plane, my system. I stood up, moved toward the back of the forward section. I had just reached the cabinet and was about to open it when I heard a voice behind me. "Excuse me." I turned. Renata Shaw was standing at the entrance to the galley, hands clasped in front of her. Expression professionally neutral. "That area is restricted," she said. I looked at her. "I'm getting documents from the cabinet. I'm sorry, but that area is for crew use only." I held her gaze for a moment. "This is my plane. That cabinet holds my documents." Something moved across her face. "Very quick. Very controlled, I understand," she said. "But according to safety protocol, passengers aren't permitted in the service areas without." "This isn't a service area," I said. My voice was even, calm. "It's a document storage compartment I had installed when I commissioned the interior redesign." There was a pause. She said, "Could I see some identification, please?" I stopped. "I want you to understand this moment, because I've been asked for identification in many contexts in my life. I've been asked for it in situations where the request made complete sense. I've been asked for it in situations where the request had nothing to do with safety or protocol and everything to do with something else. I know the difference." "Identification," I said. "Just a formality," she said. Her voice was smooth, professional. The kind of professional that can say something that makes no sense and make it sound like standard procedure. I'm a passenger on a private aircraft, I said. I've been cleared through the private terminal, through ground security, and I'm listed on the passenger manifest you verified when I boarded. It's just a precaution. Whose precaution? I asked. Quietly, she didn't answer that. And here is the thing I want you to understand about what I did next. I did not raise my voice. I did not move toward her. I did not say anything threatening. I simply reached past her and opened the cabinet. I know my rights. I know my plane. I know the law. I reached past her and opened the cabinet. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Later, when I tried to explain it to people, I had trouble with the timeline. Because when something like that happens, when it's that unexpected, your brain doesn't record it normally. It records it in pieces. I remember the sound. I remember the sudden stillness that followed. I remember looking up and finding Gus standing in the aisle, perfectly still, like a man who'd been turned to stone. I remember Reverend Abseats. He had turned from the window. His eyes were closed, not in sleep, in something else. I remember Nadine. She had set her iPad down on the seat beside her, both hands flat on her knees. And I remember turning back to Renata Shaw, standing about 2 feet away from me, her hand still slightly raised from the motion it had just completed. She had struck me, across my left cheek, not a closed fist, an open hand. The kind of thing that in another context might be called a slap, except that word feels too small for what it actually was. It was the physical expression of everything she'd been communicating since the top of those air stairs. You don't belong here. I don't believe you. I have the right to decide who gets to move freely in this space. And I'm willing to enforce that right, with my body. On my plane, the cabin was absolutely silent. The engines kept humming. The plane kept flying. 35,000 feet above the Georgia hills. I did not move. I did not speak. I looked at Renata Shaw, and I want to be very careful about how I describe what I was feeling in that moment, because I think people expect me to describe rage, and the rage was there. I won't pretend it wasn't, but what was stronger than the rage, what was sitting right on top of it, like a hand pressed flat against a wound, was a kind of clarity. A cold, absolute clarity. I thought, she doesn't know. She has no idea who I am. Not really. She hasn't read the full manifest. She hasn't asked. She looked at me and made a decision before I said a single word, and everything that has happened in the last 4 minutes has been the execution of that decision. She looked at me and decided, and now here we are. I thought about my mother's dress. Every morning, pressed and perfect. I thought about what my mother would say right now. She would say, "Do not give her the reaction she's made room for," so I didn't. What happened in the 60 seconds after that slaps tells you everything you need to know about how certain kinds of injustice sustain themselves. Renata Shaw did not apologize. She did not step back. She did not look uncertain. She did not do what a person who understood what they had just done would do. She stepped forward. "I'm going to need you to return to your seat," she said. Her voice had changed. It was still controlled. But there was something underneath it now. A kind of rigidity. The sound of a person who has committed to a course of action and is not going to let themselves reconsider it. "I'm going to need you to remain seated for the rest of the flight," she continued. "I'm going to document this incident, and we will have security personnel waiting when we land at Dulles," Gus said. "Excuse me, sir." She turned to him. "I need you to remain calm." "I am calm," Gus said. He used his Sunday voice, low and level. The voice he uses when calm is a decision he's making very deliberately. "But I watched what just happened, and I'd like to understand. Sirs, I'm asking you to return to your seat." "I'm not in my seat," Gus said. "I'm standing in the aisle of my sister's plane." Renata blinked. "Just once, we can discuss that when we land," she said. She turned to the back of the cabin, raised her voice slightly, professionally, toward the galley. "Lena, can you come up front, please?" Lena Parrish appeared from the galley. She was young, maybe 27. Her face was careful in the way that young people's faces are careful when they sense danger and aren't sure which direction it's coming from. Renata held out a clipboard to her, a form I couldn't read from where I was standing, but I recognized the format incident report. "I need you to sign as a witness." Lena looked at the form, then at me, then at Renata. Something moved across her face. Conflict. Real conflict. The kind that young people feel when the thing they know to be right and the thing that keeps their job are pointing in different directions. Renata held the clipboard a little closer. Lena, her voice dropped. You've been with Sky Elite 4 months? She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Lena took the pen. I watched her hand pause above the line, just for a second. Then she signed. I did not look away from any of this. I took it all in. I let it land, and I returned to my seat. I sat down. I placed my documents back in front of me. I folded my hands on the table. Nadine leaned over from the seat beside me. Her voice was barely a breath. Don't say anything. I know, I said. Don't do anything. I know, Nadine. She looked at me for a long moment, searching. Are you all right? I thought about the question. Really thought about it. Because, are you all right, can mean a lot of things. It can mean, are you physically hurt? It can mean, are you going to hold it together? It can mean, do you need me to do something right now? I'm going to need the file on Sky Elite, I said. Nadine went very still for a second. Then she reached for her bag. How recent, she asked. Current. Everything from March. She didn't ask why. She pulled up the file on her iPad and held it out to me. I looked at it. 2 weeks ago, Caldwell Aviation Group finalized the acquisition of Sky Elite Cabin Services, a contract services company. They provided cabin crew for private aviation clients, including for this very plane. Had been providing crew for this plane for 3 years, under a contract that predated my purchase of the aircraft. The acquisition had closed on March 14th. Today was March 28th. Renata Shaw had been a Sky Elite employee for 6 years. She was currently their most senior cabin services professional. She was, as of 2 weeks ago, an employee of a company that I now owned. She had just struck me, physically, on my plane, in front of witnesses, and she had no idea who she was actually dealing with. I set the iPad down, folded my hands again. Nadine watched me. She knew. She'd known before she handed me the file. Vivienne, she said. I can. Not yet, I said. Not yet, Nadine. She pulled back. Quiet, I heard Renata on the phone, somewhere behind. Her voice was low, but I caught pieces of it. Disruptive passenger. Refused to comply. Security at Dulles. Yes, I've documented it. I heard the word. Threatening. I sat with that for a moment, let it settle. Then I looked out the window. The sky was clear and enormous. Below us, somewhere under those clouds, was the long green country that had shaped me. Alabama, Georgia, the Carolinas. This land had not always been kind to people who looked like me. That was the truth. The history was right there in the soil. My family had lived through things in Selma that I will not describe here, not because I want to protect the listener, but because this story is not about the worst things human beings have done to each other. This story is about what you do the morning after, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. This story is about a woman who pressed her dress every day and showed up like she was worth showing up for. So I opened my documents, found my place in the Meridian Health contract, and I kept reading. Captain Harriet Cole's voice came over the intercom a few minutes later. Steady. Professional, ladies and gentlemen. We're currently at cruising altitude. We do have a slight change to note. We'll be in contact with Dulles approach control a bit earlier than planned. Flight time to Washington is approximately 1 hour and 25 minutes. We appreciate your patience. 1 hour and 25 minutes. Gus settled back into his seat. He didn't say anything to me. He knew better than to push when I was in this particular kind of stillness. But as he passed behind me, he put one hand briefly on my shoulder, just for a second. Then he was gone. Reverend Bates had turned back to the window. He was quiet, but his stillness was different from before. It was the stillness of a man who had seen something and was holding it, and Lena Parrish had retreated to the galley. I could see her from where I sat. She was standing very still, her back to the cabin, hands braced against the counter, staring at nothing. I wondered what she was thinking. I wondered what version of this story she was living herself. I hoped it was an honest one. I went back to the contract. Here is what I did not do in the 75 minutes between that moment and landing at Dulles. I did not demand to speak to the pilot. Though I could have, I did not announce who I was. Though I had every right, I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not ask for apologies. I did not argue. I did not perform calm. I actually was calm, or something that looks enough like calm from the outside that the difference doesn't matter. I worked. I read through the Meridian Health contract, made notes in the margins, flagged 3 clauses that needed revision, drafted a short memo to the legal team back in Atlanta about our position on the indemnity language. And while I worked, I thought about something my mother said to me the year I started the company. I was 32 years old. We were sitting in her kitchen in Selma. I had just told her about a meeting with a group of investors who had been polite to my face and then sent me a rejection letter that made it clear they were never going to fund a company led by someone who looked like me. I was angry. I had every right to be angry. My mother listened to the whole story, didn't interrupt once. When I was done, she sat quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Vivienne, there are 2 kinds of people in this world. People who use what they have, and people who let what they don't have use them." I said, "Mama, what does that mean?" She said, "It means you have something those men don't have. You have what you built, and what you built doesn't care who believes in it. It just exists. You understand?" I said I understood. I'm not sure I did then. I do now. Nadine came and sat beside me about 40 minutes before landing. She had been quiet most of the flight, working, thinking, doing what Nadine does. She sat down, opened her iPad. Let me read what was on it. It was the Sky Elite acquisition documentation, specifically the personnel section, the clause that governed the status of existing employees following the acquisition. Effective March 14th, all Sky Elite cabin services personnel were transferred to Caldwell Aviation Group employment contracts. Their benefits, seniority, and responsibilities remained the same. Their employer of record changed to us. To me, Renata Shaw had been, for the past 14 days, my employee. She had spent the last hour documenting me as a disruptive passenger. She had struck me. She had escalated the situation to airport security. She had positioned herself as the authority in a space she did not own, a space where, as of 2 weeks ago, she was actually accountable to me. I read through the documentation twice. Then I looked at Nadine. "How do you want to handle it?" she asked. I thought about that. Genuinely, there are moments in life when you realize that you have power, real power, the kind that can move things, change things, end things. Those moments are not always the triumphant ones. Sometimes they're the quiet ones. Sometimes they feel more like weight than like wings. Because having power doesn't tell you what to do with it. It just tells you what you can do. What you do with it, that's the part that defines you. I had options. I could have announced everything right then. I could have walked to the front of the cabin and explained, calmly, exactly what the situation was. I could have watched Renata Shaw's face as the reality landed. I didn't do that. I said to Nadine, "Get the full file ready. All of it. The acquisition documents, the personnel records, the incident report," she filed. "Everything." "For when?" Nadine asked. "For when we land," I said. "And the security team at Dulles? Let them come," I said. Let her tell her story. All of it. In front of witnesses, Nadine looked at me for a moment, then, very slightly, she nodded. She went back to her iPad. Gus came by one more time about 20 minutes before we landed. He crouched down beside my seat so we were level. "You're sure?" he said. "Sure about what?" "About waiting." "I'm not waiting," I said. "I'm choosing the right moment." He looked at me. "There's a difference?" "All the difference in the world," I said. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "You know what Mom would say right now?" I said, "She'd say press your dress and walk in anyway." He smiled. Just a little. The kind of smile that has grief in it, because she'd been gone 6 years and we still measured our best moments by what she would have said. "Yeah," Gus said. "She'd say that." He stood up, went back to his seat. The intercom clicked on. Captain Cole's voice, steady and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into the Washington area. We'll be on the ground at Dulles in approximately 20 minutes. The current time in Washington is 9:47 a.m. Temperature is 51 degrees. Skies are mostly clear. On behalf of our crew, thank you for flying with us today. We'll have you on the ground shortly." 20 minutes. I closed the Meridian contract, put it neatly in my briefcase. I straightened the papers on the table. I checked my mother's watch, and then I sat quietly and waited for the story to continue. The way my mother had taught me, not because I was powerless, not because I was afraid, but because I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew exactly what was coming. My mother taught me something that took me 30 years to fully understand, she said. The world will tell you what you're worth, every day, in 100 different ways. Some loud, some quiet, some wearing a uniform and holding a clipboard. Your job is not to argue with it. Your job is to already know the answer. She knew her answer. 41 years of knowing it. In a classroom in Selma where the budget never matched the work, where the recognition never matched the effort, she never needed the world to confirm what she already knew. I am my mother's daughter. I built something real. Something that exists without anyone's permission. And what was about to happen when that plane touched down in Washington? It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was just the truth, finally having enough room to land. The thing about injustice is this. It rarely announces itself. It doesn't come in wearing a sign. It doesn't arrive with dramatic music. It comes in quietly. It comes in the form of paperwork, procedures, protocol, the language of systems designed to sound neutral. And once the machinery starts moving, it is very hard to stop. Renata Shaw understood this. Maybe not consciously. Maybe she'd never sat down and thought it through. But somewhere in her experience, in the years of being senior cabin crew, in the years of having her word be the final word, inside a metal tube at 35,000 feet, she had learned something. She had learned that the first person to file the paperwork wins. So that's what she did. I watched her from my seat. Not obviously, not staring, just the kind of watching you develop when you've spent 30 years in rooms where you needed to understand exactly what was happening around you without letting people know you were paying attention. She had moved to the small service table near the galley entrance. She had her incident report form on the clipboard. She was writing quickly, steadily, the kind of writing that has confidence in it. I couldn't read the specific words from where I sat, but I'd seen enough incident reports in my time to know the shape of one. The boxes, the signature lines, the language that turns a human moment into a bureaucratic record. I knew what she was writing. Disruptive passenger. Refused crew instructions. Entered restricted area. Physically confrontational. Potential security risk. Every word technically referencing something that had happened. Every word stripped of the context that would explain what had actually happened. That's how it works. You don't have to lie. You just have to choose which truth to put in the box. Lena was back in the galley. I could see her profile from the angle of my seat. She was straightening things that didn't need straightening. Moving cups that were already in the right place. The physical behavior of a person whose mind is somewhere far from her hands. I watched her for a moment. Then I looked away. Nadine had positioned herself at the small table across the aisle from me. Her iPad was open. She wasn't looking at me, but her posture had that quality it gets when she's in full attorney mode. Upright. Still. Absorbing everything. Gus was 2 seats back. His coffee cup was in his hand, but I don't think he was drinking it. He was looking at the back of Renata's head with the expression of a man exercising very deliberate restraint. I knew that expression. I'd seen it on our father's face. The particular stillness of a black man in America who understands that the cost of visible anger is always paid by him, not by the person who provoked it. And Reverend Bates. The Reverend had turned from the window. He wasn't looking at Renata. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at some middle point in the air. His hands were folded in his lap. His lips were moving slightly, praying, quietly, in his own way. I found that steadying, actually. Then the intercom clicked Captain Cole's voice. Professional, even. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received a communication from Dulles Approach Control. We'll be coordinating with airport operations upon arrival. This is routine procedural communication. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll have you on the ground in approximately 1 hour and 5 minutes. 1 hour and 5 minutes. Renata finished writing. She reviewed the form once, twice. Then she picked up the cabin phone on the forward wall, pressed a button, spoke quietly for about 45 seconds, hung up, turned to survey the cabin. Her eyes moved across the seats, across Troy, asleep under his eye mask, across Reverend Bates, across Gus, across Nadine. Then they landed on me. I was looking directly at her when she looked at me. I did not look away. Neither did she. For just a moment. Then she turned back to the galley. About 10 minutes later, she came to me. She walked up the aisle, with the practiced ease of someone used to narrow spaces. Clipboard in hand, posture perfect, expression carefully neutral. She stopped beside my seat. Miss Caldwell, her voice was formal, measured. I need to inform you that I've filed an incident report, documenting the events that occurred earlier in the flight. When we land at Dulles, airport security personnel will be meeting the aircraft to conduct a brief review. I looked up at her, calmly. I understand, I said. I want to make sure you're aware of the process, she said. It's standard procedure following any documented safety concern. I understand the process, I said. A brief pause. I also need to ask you once more, she said, whether you would be willing to sign the acknowledgement section of the incident report. It simply indicates that you've been informed of. No, I said, quietly. Without heat. She nodded, made a small note on the clipboard. Can I ask you something? I said. She looked at me, waiting. Did you read the full passenger manifest when we boarded? Something shifted in her face, barely perceptible. But there. I reviewed the manifest, yes, she said. All of it? I asked. Including the notations? A pause. Slightly longer than it should have been. The manifest listed your name, she said. I confirmed your boarding. That's not what I asked, I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she said, Is there something specific you'd like to clarify about your status on this flight? Not right now, I said. She blinked. Not right now, I said again, and went back to my documents. She stood there for exactly 3 more seconds. Then she walked away. Behind me, I heard Gus exhale slowly. Then, very quietly, he said something under his breath that I won't repeat here, but that made Reverend Bates, despite everything, make a sound that was almost a laugh. I kept my eyes on my documents, but I felt, for just a moment, something loosen slightly in my chest. Not relief. Not yet, just breath. Nadine moved to the seat directly beside me. She did it naturally, casually. The way she does everything when she doesn't want to draw attention. She placed her iPad flat on the table between us, angled it so only I could see the screen. Then she looked straight ahead. I've been on the phone with the Atlanta office, she said. Very quiet. While you were reviewing the Meridian documents, and Sky Elite acquisition is confirmed fully processed as of last Tuesday. All HR records transferred. All contracts reassigned. Everything official. I nodded. I know that. The crew assignment for this flight was booked 3 weeks ago, Nadine continued, before the acquisition closed. The booking came through the old Sky Elite account. That's why there was no updated notification to the crew. I sat with that for a moment. 3 weeks ago, someone at Sky Elite, the old Sky Elite, before it was ours, had assigned Renata Shaw as lead cabin crew for this flight. Before the sale, before the paperwork, before any of this became complicated, she hadn't received any communication about the acquisition. That was an administrative gap. A real one. Nobody's specific fault. Just the kind of thing that happens in the machinery of a business transfer. She didn't know. She genuinely didn't know. And I need you to understand something about that, because it matters. It changes things. And it doesn't change things. It explains part of what happened. It doesn't excuse any of it, because her not knowing who I was didn't create what happened in that cabin. It only created the conditions. What happened? The decision to block me. The demand for identification. The physical response. The immediate escalation to documentation and security. Those came from somewhere that had nothing to do with corporate paperwork. Those came from somewhere she was bringing onto this plane before she ever looked at my name on that manifest. What do you want to do? Nadine asked. Tell me everything, I said. The full acquisition file, the employment terms, personnel records, all of them. Renata Shaw specifically, and the standard procedure for employee conduct violations under the new contract. Nadine was quiet for a second. Then she said, carefully, Vivienne, if we do this right, if we wait until we're on the ground, in front of the right people, what you have here is comprehensive. It's documented. It's airtight, I know, but if you move too early, I'm not moving early, I said. I'm not moving at all right now. I'm sitting here reading my contract. I looked at her. That's exactly what I'm doing. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. Once she picked up the iPad, went back to her own seat, but she left the file open. Now I want to tell you something, and I want to tell it honestly, because this is the part of the story that doesn't always get told. In those quiet minutes, the minutes between Nadine sitting down and what happened next, I was not at peace. I want to be clear about that. The calm you saw from the outside was real, but underneath it, there was something else. Something that I had been carrying since the top of those air stairs, and that was getting heavier with every passing minute. Not rage. Rage is too simple a word for it. It was more like grief. Grief that this was still a thing that happened in my life at this point. On my plane, I had built something real. Something that I had poured 30 years into. Something that had started with one truck and a business plan that I had revised 11 times before anyone would look at it. Something that now employed over 400 people and operated across 23 states. I had bought this plane with money I had made, legitimately, through work. And I was sitting on it being documented as a security threat by someone who had looked at me for 3 seconds and decided what I was. I thought about all the young women who looked like me, the ones who were just starting out, the ones who were in that first meeting, that first pitch, that first moment when someone looks at them and decides before they've said a word. I thought about what this does to you over time, the accumulation of it. The way it doesn't get easier, it just gets something you've learned to carry differently. I thought about the women who couldn't carry it anymore, the ones who changed, who made themselves smaller or harder or louder or quieter, trying to find the version of themselves that would be acceptable, trying to find the formula that would finally make people see them. And I thought, no, that's not the answer. The answer is not to become what they need you to be so they'll believe you. The answer is to be exactly what you are, and let the truth do what the truth does. My mother knew that answer before I was born. She lived it every day of her working life, and somewhere between watching her and becoming myself. She put it in me too. Gus came and sat beside me. He did it quietly, just settled into the seat next to mine like he belonged there, but she did. For a while we didn't speak. We've been doing this our whole lives, sitting beside each other in silence when words aren't the right tool yet. Outside the window, the sky was still vast and clear. We were over Virginia now, somewhere beneath us, the land that had been both brutal and beautiful to our family for generations. Finally, Gus said, "Lo, you remember that summer we drove to Tuskegee?" I smiled. I couldn't help it. Daddy's old truck. 3 hours in that truck with no air conditioning. Daddy said, the breeze was the air conditioning. The breeze was not the air conditioning. We sat with that for a moment, the particular warmth of an old memory. Then Gus said, he took us to see the Airman Memorial. You remember? You were 14, I said. 14, and you stood in front of that memorial for a long time. I remember thinking you'd gone quiet in a strange way. I did remember. The faces, the names, the story of men who had been told in every way possible that they did not belong in the sky, and who had gone up anyway, who had flown anyway, who had come back and kept going. Dad put his hand on my shoulder, I said, and he said, baby girl, the sky doesn't care who you are, it's just sky. I nodded. You cried, Gus said. I was 14, I said. You cried, he said again. Not unkindly, just honestly. I looked out the window. I think about that sometimes, I said, when things get like this. The sky doesn't care. It's just sky. Gus was quiet. Then, what are you going to do, Viv? I'm going to let the truth land, I said. He looked at me. When we get to Dulles, I said, going to let every single thesis of this land exactly where it belongs. He nodded slowly. Then he looked out the window too, and we just sat there, brother and sister, above Virginia, in the clear morning sky. I need to tell you about 2 things that happened while I was sitting with Gus. The first thing happened in the galley. I didn't see it directly. I was aware of it the way you become aware of sounds at the edge of your perception, the rustle of movement, the particular quality of silence that means 2 people are having a conversation they don't want overheard. But Nadine saw it. She told me later, in detail, because Nadine notices everything and forgets nothing. Renata had gone back to the galley. She was on her phone again. Nadine heard a name. Not the whole conversation, just the name. Weston, said twice. Low and sharp. Weston was the name of the director of operations at the old Sky Elite. The man who had been Renata's supervisor for the past 4 years. The man who had, presumably, been the one on the other end of those calls she'd been making. He was no longer director of operations at Sky Elite. As of 2 weeks ago, Sky Elite no longer existed as an independent entity. Weston was, as of March 14th, a former employee. He had not been retained in the acquisition. His position had been made redundant. He had received his full severance package and his final paycheck. He was, as of last Tuesday, a private citizen with no authority over anyone on this aircraft. Renata didn't know that yet either. She was calling a man who no longer had the power to help her. And she didn't know it. Nadine told me this. Quietly, without expression, I sat with it. The second thing that happened was Reverend Bates. He stood up, slowly. The deliberate way older people stand up when they've made a decision, and they're fully committed to it. He walked to the galley entrance. He stood there, in his neatly buttoned suit jacket, until Renata looked up from her phone. She looked at him. Waiting, the Reverend didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. In 40 years of ministry, he had learned that the quieter you speak, the more closely people have to listen. He said, "Excuse me, young lady." Renata said, "Yes, Reverend?" "I've been sitting on this plane for about an hour and a half now," he said. "I'm 71 years old. I've lived in this country for every one of those years. I've seen things in this life that I hope you never have to see." Renata waited. Her face was professionally neutral. "I just want to say one thing," the Reverend said. "I've watched a lot of people in a lot of situations over 71 years. And in my experience, there is one thing you can always count on." He paused. The kind of pause that a man uses when he wants what comes next to land properly. "A dangerous person," he said, "does not sit quietly and read their documents." He let that sit in the air for a moment. "That's all," he said. "I'm going back to my seat now." He turned, walked slowly back up the aisle, settled into his seat, folded his hands in his lap, looked out the window. Renata stood at the galley entrance for a moment. Her face was unreadable, but Lena was right there, standing 3 feet away. She had heard every word. "I want to say something about Lena Parrish before I go further." She was 27. 4 months into the job, she'd signed that form because someone above her had made the cost of not signing very clear, without ever saying the words out loud. I understand that. Completely being young and uncertain and new. That's not a character flaw. That's just being human in a system designed to make you feel replaceable. But she had heard the Reverend, and now she was standing at the counter with her hands braced flat against it. Very still. That stillness had a question in it. She was going to have to choose. And whatever she chose, that was going to say something permanent about who she was. I went back to my documents, and I waited to find out. 45 minutes before landing, the captain's voice came through the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, just an update on our arrival at Dulles. Airport operations has confirmed that ground personnel will be available to assist with any needs upon landing. We'll be beginning our initial descent in approximately 30 minutes. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened. Ground personnel." Gus, behind me, said very quietly. They called it in. Nadine, across the aisle, said nothing. She was already typing. I kept my eyes on my documents. Renata had moved to the front of the cabin. She was standing near the forward bulkhead, phone in hand. Her posture was straight, controlled, but something had shifted. It was subtle. The way a very small change in weather can shift the feeling of an entire room. Nothing you could point to specifically. Just a quality in the air that hadn't been there before, I thought. She called Weston. And something in that call didn't go the way she expected. I didn't know what had happened in that call. Not yet. But the quality of her stillness was different. Less certain. More effortful. She was holding a position rather than inhabiting one. There's a difference. Then Troy woke up. He did it the way he always does. One moment he was completely still. The next moment he pushed up his eye mask, sat up straight, and looked around the cabin with the alert expression of a man who had never once been disoriented upon waking. He looked at the cabin. He took it in. All of it. The quality of the silence. Nadine's posture. Gus's expression. Renata standing at the forward bulkhead. And me, sitting quietly, reading. He didn't say anything for about 15 seconds. Just looked, then he looked at me. I met his eyes. Something passed between us. The shorthand of 17 years, he said casually. To no one in particular, I miss anything? Gus said. A bit. Troy nodded slowly. Okay. He sat forward in his seat, took off his eye mask completely, and waited. The moment came about 20 minutes before landing. Renata walked back up the aisle. She stopped at my seat again. Miss Caldwell. Her voice was still professional, but the edge underneath it was different now. Tighter, like something that had been compressed and was pressing against its container. Yes, I said. I want to make you aware, she said, that the incident report has been formally filed with the Airline Operations Center. When we land, there will be both security personnel and airline representatives present. I want to ensure there are no surprises. I appreciate that, I said. I also want to say, she paused. Very briefly, I want to say that my actions during this flight have been consistent with my training, my responsibilities, and the safety requirements of private aviation. She said it the way someone says something they've prepared. Rehearsed. I understand, I said. I acted in accordance with Miss Shaw. My voice was quiet, completely level. I heard you. She stopped. I looked up at her. I've heard everything you've said on this flight. I've watched everything you've done. I have not interrupted you. I have not raised my voice. I have not done anything that would give you one legitimate reason to write my name on that form. She opened her mouth. I'm not finished, I said, gently, but firmly. You made a decision about me before I said a single word. You made it when I was at the top of those stairs. Saw it. Everyone in this cabin saw it. And everything that has happened since then has been you trying to make the paperwork fit the decision you'd already made. The cabin was very quiet. Even Troy was still. I'm not angry at you, I said, and I meant it. I genuinely am not. What I am is tired. And I think you know what kind of tired I mean. She was looking at me. Her face was controlled, but something behind her eyes was moving. When we land, I said, let the people who are waiting do their jobs. Let the truth come out the way it needs to come out. I looked back at my documents. That's all I have to say to you right now, I said. She stood there for a moment. 3 seconds. 4, then she walked back toward the front of the plane, and I heard from behind me, very soft, almost under his breath, Reverend Bates. He said, Amen. Gus came and crouched beside my seat again. He looked at me. His eyes were serious. Viv. He said, I know. I said, if they walk you off that plane before we can, they won't. But if they, Gus, I looked at him directly. Do you trust me? He held my gaze. 32 years, he said. Then trust me now. He exhaled, slow, then nodded. He stood up and went back to his seat. And that is when I closed the Meridian Health contract, placed it in my briefcase, clicked the briefcase shut. I looked out the window. We were descending now. The sky was changing. Virginia below us, all green and brown. The edge of D.C. on the horizon. I thought about my mother. Not the sad version of this thought. Not the version that comes with grief about all the things she didn't live to see. The other version. The clear version. I thought about who she was. Rosalie Caldwell. School teacher. 41 years in Selma. 41 years of pressing her dress and walking into that classroom like she owned the whole building. Like the work she did was worth showing up for. She never owned a plane. She never ran a company. She never sat in a boardroom or signed a contract worth millions of dollars. But she had something, a particular kind of unshakable knowledge of her own worth, a refusal to let the world's measurement of her become her measurement of herself. And she had given that to me. That was the inheritance. Not money, not property, this. The ability to sit in a hard moment and know, absolutely know, that the truth is coming, that you don't have to fight for it. You just have to not abandon it. The truth is coming. Let it land. 15 minutes before landing, the captain had begun the final descent sequence. The plane tilted very slightly. The engines changed pitch. Dulles was close, and then Lena Parrish walked out of the galley. She walked slowly, deliberately, the walk of someone who has made a decision and is following through before they can change their mind. She walked up the aisle to where Renata was standing. She had the incident report in her hand. Renata looked at her, waiting, reading the situation in Lena's face. Lena placed the form on the small forward table. I can't leave my signature on this, Lena said. She didn't try to physically take the form back. She knew it didn't work that way. Instead, she said what she said, clearly, in front of every person in that cabin, because a witnessed verbal statement carries its own weight. And she knew it. She had thought this through. Her voice was quiet. It was shaking slightly, but it was clear. Renata said nothing, What this says about Miss Caldwell, it's not accurate, Lena said. I was there. I saw what happened. And what's written here is not what happened. Renata's jaw tightened. Very slightly, Lena. I know what this means, Lena said. I know what it might cost me. But I can't leave my name on something that isn't true. She stepped back. She didn't go back to the galley. She stood near the forward bulkhead, hands at her sides. Eyes forward, she had made her choice, and the cabin received it. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Reverend Bates, in his seat, made a very small sound. The sound of a man who has seen something that confirms what he has always believed about the human capacity for decency. Gus, behind me, exhaled slowly. Nadine looked at the forward table, where the incident form now sat with one signature instead of two. And I looked at Lena. She didn't look at me. She was looking straight ahead, holding herself very carefully, doing the hard work of standing in a decision you've made. But I looked at her, and I thought, there it is, that thing my mother talked about. The thing that doesn't cost nothing, but costs everything, and is worth every single bit of it. Choosing the truth when the truth is inconvenient. Choosing it anyway, that's the thing. Renata stood at the forward bulkhead. The incident form was on the table. One signature short. She looked at it, then at Lena, then at the form again. For the first time in this entire flight, I watched the certainty leave her face. Not dramatically, not in a collapse, just a quiet shift. Like a light source that was pointing one direction, slowly beginning to rotate. She had built this structure carefully, methodically. Paperwork, procedure, protocol, precedent. She had done everything right, by her own internal rulebook. She had documented, reported, escalated. But the structure had a crack in it now, and somewhere in the back of her mind, I could see it. Even from where I sat, something was beginning to form. A question she hadn't let herself ask. What if she was wrong? Not about the paperwork. The paperwork said what it said. What if she was wrong about the thing that came before the paperwork? What if she had looked at a woman at the top of an air stairs and made a decision, a fast, instinctive, unexamined decision, and then spent the next hour and a half building a case to justify it? What if? She looked at the form. She looked at Lena. She looked briefly at me. I held her gaze, not with anger, not with triumph, just clearly. I'm still here. I've been here the whole time, and the truth has been here with me. Renata looked away first. The intercom clicked. Captain Cole's voice. Steady as always. Ladies and gentlemen, we are on final approach to Washington Dulles International Airport. Please ensure your seats are in the upright position, tray tables stowed, and personal items secured. We will be on the ground in approximately 8 minutes. On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for your patience today. Welcome to Washington. 8 minutes. I straightened in my seat, checked my seatbelt, placed my briefcase securely at my feet. Gus was buckled in behind me. I heard him shift in his seat. Settle. Nadine was already organized. Documents in orders. iPad closed. Expression calm. Reverend Bates had his hands folded in his lap again. He was looking at the window. The sky was different here. Lower. The gray-white of a city sky rather than the open blue of altitude. Troy was fully alert, watching, and Lena was standing near the bulkhead. Still, she had made her choice. Now the plane was going to land, and everything was about to change. There's a particular feeling you get at 35,000 feet. It's the feeling of being above everything. Above the noise. Above the city. Above the particular weight of being a black woman in rooms that weren't built for you. For a few hours, it's just sky. But here's what I've learned. You can go up. You can build high. You can buy your way into spaces people said you didn't belong in. And the thing you're carrying, it comes with you, not as a punishment, as a reminder. A reminder that the work isn't finished. That the space you're in, however high, however expensive, however much you earned it, still has to be defended sometimes. The truth doesn't float up automatically. You have to hold it. And then, when the time comes, you have to let it land. 8 minutes we were going to land, and I had not let go of a single thing I needed to hold. The wheels touched the runway at 10:04 in the morning. That particular sound, that particular feeling. The jolt. The rush of the engines reversing. The world suddenly close again after being so far away. I've landed at Dulles maybe 40 times in my life. Business trips, conferences, congressional hearings, charity events. every kind of reason a person finds themselves in Washington. But I had never landed there the way I landed that morning, with something waiting for me at the gate that wasn't a car service. The plane slowed, taxied. The terminal buildings came into view through the window. Gray sky, the flat, wide expanse of Dulles in the early morning. Nobody spoke in the cabin. That particular silence that falls when everyone knows something is about to happen, and nobody knows exactly what shape it's going to take. Gus was still behind me. I could feel his attention without looking at him. Nadine had her briefcase on her lap, both hands resting on top of it. Troy had both feet on the floor, alert, watching. Reverend Bates was looking out the window. His lips were moving again, softly, just barely. And Lena was near the forward bulkhead, standing straight. She had been standing in that same spot for the last 8 minutes of flight. She hadn't moved. She wasn't going to move. Renata was at the front of the cabin. Her back was partially to us. She was looking toward the forward door, waiting for the ground crew to signal clearance to open. The plane stopped. Engines wound down. The ground crew connected the jetway. And then, the door opened. 2 people stepped aboard. The first was a man in a dark jacket, mid-40s, compact build. He had a Dulles Airport operations badge on a lanyard, and the particular expression of someone who has been asked to handle a situation they don't yet fully understand. The second was a woman, late 40s, business suit, FAA identification badge clipped to her lapel. She moved with the deliberate efficiency of someone who knew exactly what her authority was and had no need to announce it. Her name, would learn in the next few minutes, was Patricia Drummond. She was with the FAA Office of Civil Rights. She had been at Dulles that morning for an entirely unrelated matter, a quarterly compliance review with one of the commercial carriers. Nadine had reached her by phone 14 minutes before we landed, had given her a concise summary. 2 minutes. Nadine is very good at 2-minute summaries. Nadine had done her homework before we ever boarded that morning. She'd noted the quarterly compliance schedule for Dulles. She'd known Patricia Drummond's office was there. She'd kept that information in her back pocket, the way she keeps everything. Quietly, precisely, until the moment it was needed. That's what 11 years of working together looks like. Patricia Drummond had listened. Then she had said, "I'll be at the gate." She was. Renata Sopp stepped forward to meet them. Professional. Composed. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I'm Renata Shaw, Senior Cabin Services, Sky Elite. I filed the incident report approximately 70 minutes ago." The passenger in question, Patricia Drummond, looked past her. Looked at me. I was still seated. Seatbelt still fastened. Briefcase at my feet. Patricia walked toward me, directly, without detour. She stopped at my row. "Miss Caldwell," she said. "Miss Drummond," I said. Renata turned. Something moved across her face. A small recalibration. "You two know each other?" she said. "We do not," Patricia said, without looking at Renata. "Your attorney contacted my office during final approach." She looked at me. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "Are you injured?" "No." She nodded. Turned to the airport operations officer. Said something brief and quiet to him. He nodded and stepped back. Then she turned to face the cabin. "All of us. I'd like everyone to remain on board for a few minutes," she said. Her voice was clear and carried without effort. "I need to understand what happened on this flight. I'll speak with each of you individually," Renata said. "I've already filed the official." "I've seen the report," Patricia said. A pause. "I have some questions," Patricia said. She said it simply, without drama, without accusation. But those 4 words, "I have some questions," landed in that cabin with the weight of everything that had been building for the past 2 hours. Renata was quiet. Patricia Drummond asked to use the small forward table as a workspace. She sat down, placed her own materials in front of her, opened a tablet. "Looked up, Ms. Shaw," she said. "I've read the incident report. I'd like you to walk me through the events in sequence." Starting from boarding, Renata stood across from her, clipboard in hand. She began to speak. I won't give you every word of what she said, but I'll tell you the shape of it. She described a passenger who had been uncooperative from the moment of boarding, who had moved into a restricted area without permission, who had refused crew instructions, who had been physically confrontational when redirected, who had refused to sign the acknowledgement form. Every sentence was precise. Every sentence was accurate in its narrow literal sense, and every sentence existed inside a frame that had been built before I said a single word on those air stairs. Patricia listened. She didn't interrupt. She made occasional notes. When Renata finished, Patricia said, "Thank you." Then she looked at Lena. "Miss Parrish," she said. "You were present throughout?" Lena said, "Yes, ma'am." "Would you describe the same sequence of events?" Lena glanced at Renata, just for a second, then looked at Patricia. "No," she said. "I wouldn't." The word landed quietly, but it landed completely. Patricia said, "Tell me what you saw." And Lena told her. She told it straight. No embellishment. No dramatization. The way a person tells the truth when they've decided to tell the truth and aren't trying to make it into a performance. She described a passenger who had moved to access a storage cabinet, who had identified herself calmly, who had been repeatedly questioned despite answering every question, who had not raised her voice, who had not made any threatening movement. And then she described what had happened, the sound of it. She didn't use dramatic language. She just said what happened. Clear. Plain. Patricia wrote something on her tablet. Then she looked at Renata. "Miss Shaw," she said, "is Miss Parrish's account consistent with yours?" Renata said, "There are differences in interpretation. Is the physical contact Miss Parrish described consistent with your account?" A pause. Renata said, "I was responding to what I assessed as an escalating." "Miss Shaw." Patricia's voice didn't change, didn't harden, just stayed exactly level. I asked a direct question. A long pause. "The contact occurred," Renata said. "The cabin was absolutely silent." Patricia made another note. Then she said, "I'd like to look at something." She looked at Nadine. "Ms. Okafor, I believe you have some documentation relevant to this situation." Nadine opened her briefcase, placed a set of documents on the table. She placed them neatly, squarely, the way she places everything. Then she stepped back. Patricia looked at the documents. The first was the Certificate of Aircraft Registration, N7714VC, Vivienne A. Caldwell. Cole Caldwell Aviation Group LLC. She set it aside. The second was the Sky Elite Cabin Services Acquisition Agreement. Cole Caldwell Aviation Group as acquiring entity. Effective date March 14th. She looked at it for a moment. Then she placed it carefully on the table. She picked up the third document, the Sky Elite Personnel Transfer Agreement, listing all active Sky Elite employees as of the acquisition date, now operating under Cole Caldwell employment contracts. She found the name, Renata Shaw, Senior Cabin Services Professional. Transferred. She set it down. Then she looked up. She looked at Renata Shaw, and she said gently, "Miss Shaw, do you know who owns Sky Elite Cabin Services?" Renata was looking at the documents. She wasn't looking at Patricia. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the documents on the table. The acquisition agreement, the date, March 14th, 2 weeks ago. The air in the cabin changed. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but it changed. The way temperature changes when a door opens somewhere. A shift. A new thing entering the space. I watched it happen on her face, the understanding arriving. Not all at once, in pieces. The way comprehension comes when what you're learning contradicts something you were certain of. She had believed she was operating in a context she understood. She had believed she knew who had authority here. She had believed the structure around her was the structure she had always known. She was wrong. The woman she had documented as a security threat was the owner of the aircraft. The woman she had physically struck was the owner of the aircraft. The company she worked for had been acquired 2 weeks ago by the woman in seat 1A, the woman she had been employed by for 14 days without knowing it. Was the woman she had spent the last 2 hours trying to have escorted off the plane. Renata Shaw stood very still. The clipboard was still in her hand. The pen was still clipped to the top. She did not speak. Troy spoke first. Quietly, from his seat. "Patricia," he said, "I was on this flight. I can confirm everything Lena described. I was asleep for some of it, but I was awake for the relevant parts." Patricia looked at him. "Troy Wemberton," he said, "I'm a business partner of Miss Caldwell's. I have no stake in this other than telling you what I saw." Patricia nodded. "Made a note." Reverend Bates raised one hand. Slowly, like a man in church. Patricia looked at him. "Reverend Cornelius Bates," he said, "I'm a family friend. I was present throughout. I'll tell you what I observed." He paused. I observed a woman who was treated as a problem before she was treated as a person, he said. I observed a woman who maintained her dignity under conditions that would have broken a lesser person. And I observed a young crew member. He looked briefly at Lena, who found the courage to tell the truth when it was not the easy thing to do. He folded his hands back in his lap. That's my observation, he said. I'm happy to put it in writing, Patricia said. I may take you up on that, Reverend. She turned back to the table. She looked at the documents. Then at Renata. Miss Shaw, she said, I need to inform you that this matter will be formally reviewed by the FAA Office of Civil Rights. Given what's been presented here, I also want to be clear about what the documentation shows. The incident report you filed. I have significant questions about the accuracy of the characterizations in it. Renata opened her mouth. Patricia said, I'm not making a determination right now. I'm telling you what the review process will involve, she paused. Is there anything you'd like to say at this time? Renata looked at the documents, then she looked at me. For the first time since the top of those air stairs, she looked at me directly. Not through the professional veneer, not through the armor of protocol, just directly. And I saw something there that I hadn't expected to see. Not defiance, not calculation, something closer to recognition, the slow, painful recognition of someone who is beginning to understand the shape of what they've done. She didn't apologize. Not then. She didn't say anything at all. She looked at the documents, then looked away. And Patricia Drummond moved to the next phase of her process. What happened next, I did not witness directly. I learned about it from Nadine, who was standing close enough to hear, and from Patricia Drummond, who told me later in the course of the formal review. Renata's phone rang. She stepped to the side of the cabin to answer it, turned partially away. The call lasted about 90 seconds. I watched her posture during those 90 seconds, the way it changed. Not dramatically, not a collapse, but a series of small adjustments, a tightening, a particular quality of stillness that comes when what you're hearing is not what you expected to hear. She ended the call, stood for a moment without moving, then turned back. The person on the other end of that call had been Derek Weston, the former director of operations at Sky Elite, the man she had been contacting throughout the flight, the man she had believed was her safety net. What he had told her in those 90 seconds was essentially this: Sky Elite was gone, had been gone for 2 weeks. He was no longer her supervisor. He was no longer anyone's supervisor in this context. He had no authority here. He could not protect her. He could not intervene. Whatever was happening on that plane was happening in a company that belonged to someone else now. And that someone else was Vivienne Caldwell. He had ended the call, and Renata was standing in the forward cabin of a plane that she had tried to run as her own domain, and discovering that the domain she thought she was standing in had changed owners without her knowledge. This is the moment I need you to understand. Not because it's the triumphant moment. Not because it's the moment when justice arrives in a thunderclap. It's actually a quieter moment than that. Because watching someone understand the full scope of what they've done and what it's going to cost them is not a satisfying thing to witness. I know people might expect me to feel something different. I know the version of this story where the protagonist watches the antagonist's face fall and feels the clean rush of vindication. I did not feel that. What I felt was something heavier than vindication. I felt the weight of the entire morning, the accumulation of every moment from the top of those air stairs to this one, the tiredness that isn't the good kind, the awareness of how much had happened just to arrive at the point where the truth was plainly visible to everyone in the room. This shouldn't have been this hard. This should not have required aircraft registration documents and a coincidental meeting between my attorney and an FAA compliance officer and a young woman finding the courage to retract a signature. None of this should have been necessary. And yet here we were. Patricia Drummond wrapped up her initial review. She had spoken individually with Lena, with Troy, and briefly with Reverend Bates. She had reviewed all the documents Nadine had provided. She had a full picture. She came and sat across from me. Miss Caldwell, she said. First, I want to acknowledge what happened on this flight. Formally, what you experienced is not acceptable under any regulatory framework. And it is certainly not acceptable under basic human standards of conduct, I said. Thank you. The FAA review process will be formal and thorough, she said. Given the nature of the documented contact and the additional concerns about the accuracy of the incident report, this will go through the full review cycle. I understand, I said. She paused, looked at me carefully. Is there anything you want me to know right now? She said. Anything not in the documents. I thought about that. I want you to know, I said, that I didn't say anything on this flight that wasn't true. I identified myself when asked. I explained what I was doing when I was questioned. I did not raise my voice. I did not make any threatening movement. I sat down when I made my choice to sit down. Patricia nodded. And I want you to know, I said, that I am not the first person this has happened to. The specific circumstances, the plane, the acquisition, the documents, those are specific to this situation. But the thing that started it, that look at the top of the stairs, that particular decision that was made before I said a word, I paused. That is not specific to this situation, I said. Patricia held my gaze. No, she said quietly. It is not. We sat with that for a moment, then she said, what would you like to do about Miss Shaw and her team? This is the part I want to be careful about, because it would be easy to tell this part of the story wrong. It would be easy to make it about power, about the satisfaction of having the authority to do something and doing it, about the moment when the balance shifts and the person who is controlling the room suddenly understands that they are not. That would be a satisfying version of this story, emotionally clean, the kind of ending that feels complete. But that's not what happened, and it's not what I wanted to happen. Nadine was standing beside me. She had the employment documentation open on her tablet. The Caldwell personnel policies, the acquisition contract, the conduct provisions. She looked at me. Waiting, I knew what she was waiting for, I said. Sit down, Nadine. She sat. I looked at Patricia Drummond. I want to be clear about something first, I said. Lena Parrish, the junior crew member. She retracted her signature. She told the truth when it cost her something real. I want it formally noted that her employment is secure, that this situation will have no negative impact on her position, Patricia said. I can note that. It's not a note, I said. It's a condition of how I want this handled. Patricia looked at me, then wrote something down. Understood, she said. The same goes for Captain Cole and her co-pilot, I said. They acted professionally under a difficult set of circumstances with incomplete information. They followed procedure correctly. I have no concerns about either of them. Patricia nodded. I sat for a moment. The cabin was quiet around us. Troy was standing near the window. Reverend Bates was in his seat. Gus was standing in the aisle, hands in his pockets, watching me with an expression I knew very well. The expression of a person waiting to see what kind of person you're going to be when you have the choice. I thought about what my mother had said that day in the kitchen in Selma. There are two kinds of people in this world. People who use what they have, and people who let what they don't have use them. I thought about what she hadn't said. The part she left for me to figure out on my own over the next 25 years. That using what you have doesn't mean using all of it. It doesn't mean using it as hard as you can. It means using it for something that matters. Using it in a way you can live with. Using it in a way that makes the thing you built mean something beyond the transaction. I thought about Renata Shaw standing at the forward bulkhead, the clipboard still in her hand. Waiting, I thought about what I knew about her. Not much. 6-year employment record at Sky Elite. Consistent professional reviews until the last 18 months, where there was a pattern, small but there, of complaints that had been filed and not followed through. The kind of pattern that accumulates when there is no accountability structure requiring it to be addressed. She had been allowed to be who she was, because no one had ever required anything different. That was not entirely her fault. Was also not irrelevant. I thought about what justice looked like, what it was supposed to do, what it was for. Not revenge. Revenge is about the person who was wronged. Justice is about the thing that went wrong. They're not the same. What went wrong on this flight was real. What happened to me was real, and it needed a real response. But a real response wasn't the same as the maximum available response. I looked at Patricia Drummond. I want Renata Shaw And the rest of the Sky Elite crew on this flight terminated, I said. Through the standard employment process. With everything they're entitled to under their contracts. Full severance. Full benefits continuation through the coverage period. Nothing withheld, Patricia said. That's within your authority as the contracting entity. I know, I said. I also want the formal FAA review to proceed. Fully. On its own timeline. That process exists for a reason, and I'm not going to interfere with it. Understood, and I want it documented, I said. Not for publicity, not for a lawsuit. Just documented, accurately, what happened on this flight. What the review found. What was decided. I paused. Because documentation is how we make it harder for this to keep happening, I said. Not impossible. Just harder. Patricia was writing. She finished. Looked up. Is there anything else? She said. I thought for a moment. One more thing, I said. I want a copy of this review, when it's complete, shared with Sky Elite, with Cole Caldwell's Cabin Services Division now, I should say, for use in their training programs, without identifying information where appropriate. But the substance of it. What happened? Why it happened? What it cost? You want it used as a teaching case, Patricia said. I want it used as a learning opportunity, I said. There's a difference. Teaching cases tell you what went wrong. Learning opportunities make you think about why. Patricia looked at me for a long moment. Then she said quietly, Miss Caldwell, I've been in this work for 22 years. I want you to know what you're describing, the way you're handling this. She paused. It's not common, she said. I know, I said. But my mother didn't raise me for common. Nadine handled the formal termination process. She is very good at formal processes. She spoke with Renata Shaw separately, in a side room off of the gate area. I was not present for that conversation. Nadine told me afterward that it was brief, professional. She explained the situation, the acquisition, the effective date, the employment implications. She explained the termination terms. She answered the questions that were asked. Nadine said that Renata had been mostly quiet throughout. At the end, she had asked one question. She had asked, Does she want me to apologize? And Nadine, being Nadine, had said, Miss Caldwell didn't ask me to answer that question. She had paused. Then she'd said, But for what it's worth, and this is not legal advice, an apology would be for you, not for her. It wouldn't change what happened, but it might change something about who you are going forward. She had left it there. Renata Shaw did not seek me out to apologize that day. Maybe she did later. Maybe she didn't. I don't know the rest of her story. I only know mine. The rest of the Sky Elite crew on that flight were notified through standard HR channels. 2 other crew members who had been in the back galley for most of the incident. Neither of them had done anything wrong, in a direct sense. But the employment arrangement with the old Sky Elite structure was being unwound in any case as part of the acquisition integration. And this incident accelerated the timeline for this particular crew assignment. They received full contractual severance, full benefits, written references where appropriate. I do not know what they thought about what happened. I do not know if they understood the full picture. They may have known very little of it. Lena Parrish. I want to tell you about this specifically, because it matters. She was standing near the gate area when Nadine finished with the official process, standing a little apart from the others, waiting. I found her there. She looked at me, and something in her face was that particular mix of relief and residual fear that comes after you've done a hard thing and aren't sure yet what it's going to mean. I said, How are you doing? She said, honestly, a little shaky. That's normal, I said. She said, I'm sorry I signed it. At first, I looked at her. You were 4 months into a job and someone above you put a pen in your hand and implied there would be consequences. You're 27 years old. That's not an excuse, she said. No, I said, it's not. But it is a reason, and you fixed it. That's what I remember. She was quiet for a moment. What happens to me now, she said. You work for Cole Caldwell Cabin Services now, I said. Same as you did yesterday. Except now you know who your employer is. She blinked. Your position is secure, I said. Your record is clean. And for what it's worth, what you did this morning, standing up in that cabin and saying what you said, that takes a kind of character that I cannot teach. Either people have it or they don't. Her eyes were bright, Miss Caldwell. You don't have to say anything, I said. Just go forward. Gus found me in the gate area while Nadine was finishing the last of the paperwork. He came and stood beside me. We looked out the large windows at the tarmac. The planes moving, the gray Washington sky. He said, "You okay?" "You keep asking me that," I said. "You keep deserving the question," he said. "I thought about it. Really thought about it. I'm tired," I said. "The good kind or the bad kind?" I smiled. "Just a little. Both, honestly." He nodded. "The meetings are at 2 o'clock, he said. "I know. You want to eat something first? There's a place in the terminal." "In a minute," I said. He waited beside me. Looking out the window, after a moment he said, "You know what Dad would say? Something embarrassing that we'd both remember forever," I said. He laughed, the big laugh. "The one like our father," he'd say. Gus started, then stopped. "You know what? No. You know what he'd actually say? What?" He'd say, "Baby girl, the sky doesn't care who you are." I looked at the sky through the window. "It's just sky," I said. "Yeah," Gus said. "It's just sky." We stood there for another moment, brother and sister, in a terminal in Washington. The long morning finally arriving at something like stillness. Then Reverend Bates appeared at Gus's elbow. He had his jacket buttoned, his small travel bag in one hand. He looked at us both. Then he said seamlessly, "I'd like to pray with you, if you'll permit me." Gus looked at me. I said, "Please." Right there in the gate area, 3 people standing together. The Reverend's voice low and unhurried, not asking for anything dramatic, not calling for vengeance or validation, just gratitude. For truth, for the people who stand in it, for the morning that had been hard and was now, slowly, becoming something else. He said, "And Lord, we ask for the wisdom to know what to hold and what to set down, because not everything is ours to carry forever. Amen." Gus said amen. I said amen. The Meridian Health meeting was at 2 o'clock. We arrived at the building on K Street at 1:55. The lobby was all glass and gray marble. That particular Washington formality I had changed in the car. A clean jacket from my bag. My mother's watch was still on my wrist. The Meridian team was waiting in the conference room. 5 people around a long table. The kind of table that's designed to communicate that serious things happen here. One of the men at the table, the lead negotiator, I had worked with him twice before, stood when I came in. "Miss Caldwell," he said. "We heard there was a situation with your flight this morning." I looked at him. "There was," I said. "It's been resolved." He paused. "Are you all right?" I set my briefcase on the table. I thought about that question. I thought about my mother pressing her dress. I thought about my father standing in front of the Tuskegee Memorial, with his hand on my shoulder. I thought about Gus's laugh and the Reverend's prayer, and Lena standing at the forward bulkhead, shaking and steady at the same time. I thought about what it had taken to get to this room, not just this morning, all of it. 30 years of it. "I'm fine," I said. "Let's talk about this contract," he nodded. Sat back down. I opened my briefcase, and we got to work. There's something I want to say before I let this story rest. I am not telling you this because I want your anger. I have enough of my own. I'm not telling you this to make you feel hopeless about the world. The world is hard, but it is not hopeless. I'm telling you this because of what my mother knew. She knew that the work of a human life is not to avoid the hard moments. You cannot avoid them. They find you regardless of what you build or buy or accomplish. They find you on Tuesday morning at 35,000 feet. They find you in bank offices and boardrooms and on the stairs of your own aircraft. The work is what you do inside those moments, not the dramatic version of it. Not the movie version where the music swells and the protagonist delivers the perfect speech and everyone learns their lesson in real time. The actual version, which is quieter, which is slower, which asks you to hold your dignity like a compass, when everything around you is trying to tell you that you don't deserve to have one. Lena Parrish learned something that morning about the cost of choosing the easy wrong over the hard right. I hope she carries it. I believe she will. Renata Shaw. I don't know what she learned. That's not for me to determine. What I know is that I did not let her actions determine mine. I made the choices I made because they were right, not because they were satisfying, not because they were the maximum, because they were right. And my mother's voice was in every single one of them. "Vivienne, they can underpay you. They can overlook you. They can decide before you open your mouth what category you belong in. but they cannot tell you that you are not worth showing up for. You show up, you do the work, you hold the truth, and you press your dress every morning, like you know exactly who you are. A few weeks after that morning, I got a short email, no subject line. Just a few sentences, Miss Caldwell. I've been thinking about what happened on that flight every day since. I don't have the right words for what I want to say. But I wanted you to know, I'm not going to forget it, and I'm not going to be the person who signs something she knows isn't true. Not again. Not ever. LP, I read it once, then I saved it. Not because it changed anything about what happened, but because it was proof of something I needed to believe. That people can choose differently. That a single morning, a hard one, an ugly one that never should have happened, can still plant something. Something small. Something quiet. Something that grows. My mother pressed her dress every morning for 41 years. She never knew how many people watched her do it. She never knew what it planted. I know. I'm still growing from it.